the Shumish first part of this prayer, I've shared this before. Literally, it means the light, the spark in God, is the same spark in me and in everyone. And it's an affirmation. Believe that you are part of God. Number one. That's where we all begin. And then I will invite all those that we are in relationship with. And women will understand that one of those relationships is with the moon. So I'll be calling in the moon and the sun and all of the stars in the universe. And it goes on to finally get down to right here. And everything that I stand on, the Mother Earth is our mother. We breathe the air, and I'll be calling in all of the elements, wind, fire, and water. So bear with me as I say this prayer. I want you to invite your ancestors, your spiritual helpers, your guides, all those that take care of you, whether you realize it or not. You can ask for their help anytime, because you are part of God. No yakti pakpawel. Andigi yakti pakpawel tobet. Yakti pakpawel alaba akiwa andi alish yakti pakpawel kotikap. Yakti pakpawel mubu iktelimu alawa mahalama. Yakti pakpawel ner ao kote. Owaska. Blessings of health and happiness to everyone here and everyone that you are in relationship with. Not only your immediate family and all your relatives, but also all those that you work with, all those that you are in community with. And I'm hopeful that our community grows bigger and bigger, and that we realize we're part of the community of humanity, and not only our country here, but around the world. We are one people. Sadly, there's been a lot of misinformation lately about separation. We all know, including all indigenous people. That's how we lose our power. So remember, we're all in one. We're always one family. Kwame, may it please you. And blessings to the family, especially Juliet, and to the wonderful person that I met years ago, Paul James. Thank you. It's a repetition. I invite them, and then I have to send all the spirits home. Because my part's done. Go to the door,
How's that for 11th hour arrival? Love it. James is twinkling from up above. Little smiles going on here. And now I want to invite Anna and Bayan Rice, who really contributed to my ever having met James. I met James at their gallery when they had one in Los Olivos, and it was a delightful day. So come on over, your history goes long. Come and share. Thank you, Ginger. Thank you, Art. That was incredible. Thank you for setting that tone. As if things couldn't get any more beautiful and special here today, I think you just elevated it, so thank you. I'm Anna Rice. I'm here with my husband, Brian, along with our son, Miles, my mom, Larissa. Welcome. Today, I'm going to call Artiste the House of James. This is the House of James. And it was not even a second thought that we would host this. There is so much I could say, but you know, this is where we needed to celebrate his life. I'm going to pass the mic on to Brian. He's going to start with history of how long we've known James and what he means to us.
Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate a true artist, great friend, his family. I swear I wasn't going to cry, but I probably want to. James and I go back 30 years. We met in 1994. A really close friend of mine who I went to college with grew up in Malibu and saw James painting on the beach. And James welcomed him to watch him paint and teach him how to paint. And we were looking for an artist for the Vintners Association that year. And James became our 1994 featured artist for the Santa Barbara County Vintners Association that year. And then I invited him to dinner at my family's winery, Sunstone. And we were sitting there with Juliet. And of course, James begged her to break into song. And I realized, wow, Juliet is literally such a stunning human being, and what a beautiful songbird she is. And no wonder James fell in love with you. And that love that he had for Juliet, we all know, is the underlying principle of his life. And he was like a child. Everything he did was like innocent and pure. And you see it in his art. It's so bright and colorful and really represents his personality. And so that dinner where we sat and had dinner, I said, James, would you be interested in being on our wine, a wine label? And that was how it all began. And so we featured him on our 1997, which was my first vintage making wine, my first vintage and blend called Arrows. And that was the very beginning of something that ended up turning into an amazing relationship. James was a true artiste, a bon vivant, you know, a lover. And he and I were like kindred spirits, even though we had such a huge age gap. I felt like he was right there with me, you know. And he truly was one of the most non-judgmental, caring people I've ever met. It was a true joy to work with James collaboratively on art projects. I featured him on over 40 wine labels over the 20 years since we started Artiste. We featured him on our walls, we featured him on our labels, but more importantly, we featured James. When James would show up with 5 or 6 paintings, he would literally just show up, and I'm expecting him to show up any minute. With a portfolio of new works, very prolific. But the true honor was having James at all of our events where people got to meet the true artist behind the paintings. His art was how he lived his life. And we were really honored to have him as part of our family. So.
Thanks, Brian. I don't know if you mentioned that really this entire concept of Artiste was born out of James, out of that one label that you did at Sunstone. It was so well received and so successful. That one art label we did at Sunstone called Arrows, that we decided to start an entire wine brand around art labels. So here we are. So thank you, James. Honestly, your legacy lives on forever and ever through this. I've had the honor of curating James's art, not only on our wines, but also in the art gallery. And I can say, and I know Robert and Lori, who've been with us forever at Artiste back there, thank you very much, we love you, that James's works are by far the most popular works that we have ever featured and sold here at Artiste. Robert, how many pieces have we sold of James's works? 200, 300, 400, 1,000? A lot. So people love James's works, and we will carry on James's spirit here forever, as long as we can through his artwork. So, do you have anything else to say?
No, you took my line a little bit, but
Sorry.
no, I think the House of James summarizes everything. This is his spirit will continue to live into the future. Artistes will always be representing James not only on the walls and our labels, but in spirit, and we will always remember him as the greatest artist.
Yeah. Cheers to James.
Cheers to James. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much. The House of James. And now we're going to meet this beautiful woman whom you all know one more time, the muse of the beautiful man we are celebrating today, Juliet.
Thank you, Ginger. I have so many people to thank for putting this together. Brian and Anna, oh my God. Immediately, 2 days after, it just said, we are hosting this. And I accepted, of course. Thank you. Thank you for everyone who helped put this together. I'd like to name everyone. I don't think I'm going to be able to at this moment. I just might mention too that I have angels for siblings and in-laws who are just, and friends who I have felt so supported, so loved, and I am so moved by all the love, all the people who love James. I met James in 1984. I met him, I was with a friend that was in the passenger seat. And we had had lunch, I was just getting to know her. We had lunch down in Santa Monica, Venice. Driving home, and she started waving out the window, and she said, hi James. And I said, who's James? And she said, he's this artist who painted me once. I was dating someone up the street. And then there's James on the patio of a bungalow on Ocean Park Boulevard, painting away, and he sees us, and he runs across Ocean Park Boulevard, and in the passenger window says hello, and I saw those eyes, and smile, and so friendly and passionate and full of life. And he said, I'm working on this painting, why don't you come and see it? And see my etchings. Well, it worked. We went to park, and I said, I like him. And she said, yeah, he's nice, isn't he? Nice guy. And I said, no, I like him. And I felt that he would be in my life forever, but I didn't know how. It wasn't like an immediate romantic attraction like that. It was, I'm with this person for the rest of my life somehow. Anyway, the rest is history. We had many adventures together. I was always impressed by how he woke up every single day with a passion for life, excited about the day. I don't know if I've ever met anyone who had that much excitement about life. And we had our adventures and our ups and downs. One thing is both of us were able to hold forgiveness in our hearts for all our little ups and downs. And we were both inspired by love. And I have to say that, that in Socrates and Plato's Symposium, they're all sitting around talking about love, right? And they're coming up with all of these ideas about what it is to be loved, and what does that mean? And Socrates said that the Oracle of Delphi told him that The one who loves is the fortunate one, because that person is inspired. And that always sat with me, because it reminded me of James. You know? He said that his religion was that he felt like a druid. He loved his walks in nature along the bluffs of Carpinteria. He used to run along them. And he would bring back little flowers, seashells. He would tell me that when he was a boy, his father would take him to the old mill pond. It was a property they owned out in the country in Indiana. And his father would tell him stories about the Potawatomi, who were indigenous to that land. Beautiful stories about them. James remembers that as one of the most beautiful times in his life. And his pony, I think the pony's name was Julie. You know, we have a little rose bush outside our front door. It's a rose, it's a little pot, and Sarkadis, you gave that to us. Where are you? Somewhere in here. There you are, thank you. Well, every now and then, that pot of roses will bloom. And I've been watching it for the last few days because James loved roses and he would get so excited when that would pop up with a rose. Well, they were closed like this. And this morning, one of them was open like that. And I went to have coffee with Sarah, his beautiful daughter. And when we came back, I said, I'm going to check that rose. I have a feeling it's bloomed. I have a feeling that James bloomed that rose. And you know what? I brought it with me because he did. He was so courageous this past year with all he was going through. And in these last times when I'm sitting next to his bed and he would go in and out of sleep, do you know what I'd see him do? He would be sleeping and he'd go like this. While he was sleeping, in the morning of his passing, that morning he told me that he had seen a golden light around his face when he was sleeping the night before. And I thought, oh, okay. And he passed that night. And about a week later, Lori, who's here too, took me for a walk at the Botanical Gardens, and a dragonfly showed up and went for a walk on my finger for quite a while, actually. And then the week after, I had a dream that was more than a dream. It was a visit. It was a visit. And we spoke, and he was glowing. He looked beautiful. And I said, what is it like on the other side? What is it like to transition? What is it like, James? He said, it's not a transition. Well, I wrote a poem that I'll close with. It's interesting, yesterday we put his ashes in and I totally lost it. I couldn't get through much, but somehow I feel that the joy of this room and his experiences here is holding me together. Okay. You're silent, my love, but I know where to find you. I see you in the folds of ocean waves by your walking path, and hear you in the tuk-tuk-tuku sound of that funny bird in the sycamore tree. I feel you when dragonfly rests on my hand. And when I come home and sit in your big chair, I'll always remember your eyes. Those sweet blue eyes that captured me in 1984 when you ran across Ocean Park Boulevard to meet me for the first time in your pink speckled cap and melted me with your diaphragm. rest of a smile and lively poetic ways. So paint the sky, my love, as you flow to the sacred land. You are not lost to me. No, you are not lost. You're silent, my love, but only worldly ways. And I know where to find you. Thank you. And now we're going to meet James's lovely daughter, Sarah.
Good afternoon. I started out talking yesterday saying that being his daughter was my highest honor. And I'll repeat that again today. I think most of you in the room know this, but anybody who is short on celestial history or rusty, I'm here to tell you that he hung the moon. He also created the stars. He is responsible for sunshine and the creation of the universe. Also, he invented puppies, anything sweet, or anything fun. These are truths. I don't know a lot about hunting, but I'm very interested in dogs. And what I know from that is that he was a sight hound for beauty. And he knew how to find it, render it, and then bring it home for all of us to consume. He wasn't a bounty hunter. He did it for us to feast upon. And what I like to think about is that even though he had so many gifts, his greatest legacy is really his art. Again, I said this yesterday. He had a suit of armor, but a heart of gold. Thank you.
So well put in the House of James. You know, I just want to follow that, Anna, because I have a room in my home where when I first met him, I bought 2 of his paintings. They are in a room called the James Paul Brown Conversation Room with the hand-me-down sofa from Elizabeth and Lawrence, who are here today. It is a room to visit. He is with us. He's in our lives. Thank you so much, Sarah. And now we're going to continue with family members. Jana. Jana Sheehan is here to speak on behalf of the Brown family, accompanied by her son.
Okay, I can't do it as well extemporaneously as everybody else has. So I do have some things written down here. My name is Jana Sheehan, and I'm Jim's cousin. His dad and my mom were brother and sister. And our families were raised in a small town in northwestern Indiana, Crown Point, Indiana. If anybody has ever heard of it, just south of Gary, which I'm sure people have heard of, and near Chicago. And it was a wonderful place to grow up. And with our cousins, Peter, Jim, and I don't call him James, I call him Jim, because that goes way back. Peter, Jim, Tony, and Bill, and my brothers, John and Ed. We had a great childhood back in that time. I kind of wish it was still around. The holidays were spent with families, which also included our other cousins, Bill, Phil, Bob, and John, whose parents were my mother and Jim Dad's father and his wife, Holden Brown. So they lived in Shelby, Indiana, down by the Kankakee River. Very big farming area. We would get together for family dinners, and after everyone was done eating, the kids would take off, get away from the old folks, and go to whoever's house we were in for that dinner. Just go in and have fun and enjoy ourselves. And it was really something we looked forward to. I fondly remember the Brown family home, which was indescribable. It was on the south end of town, and it was absolutely lovely. It had a lot of trees and woods, and I remember a pond on the property where we would go fishing and jump in, and I think we ice skated in the winter. I can't remember for sure, but we all loved to do that. Okay, where am I here? Okay. Anyway, I just want to say that I have all fond and lovely memories of growing up with the Brown family back in Crown Point, and I really relish and appreciate all of that, and all my cousins and all the Brown families. And I want to meet you. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. And now we're moving from the Brown family into James in Ocean Park with Larry. Larry and Winter. Welcome.
Time really flies when you're alive. And then when someone passes, you stop, the world stops, and you're absorbed in that long moment of trying to understand and trying to process that loss. I never imagined Jim would be a loss to anyone because he left so much in all of us. I met him on Ocean Park. He had just left a long relationship. He moved from his beachfront home into a cottage on Ocean Park Boulevard with all us degenerates. From the fireman who sniffed cocaine all night to David Mizrahi, the inventor of the waterbed, to Jack and Bailey and his menacing crowd of Harley riders. Jim was thrust into this crazy environment. At that time, it was the beginning of a metamorphosis when he went from Jim Brown to James Paul Brown. A transition we all accepted readily because his love of art, and his love of the world, and his love of life was so intoxicating. And so were the beautiful wines he brought from Malibu and introduced us all to Chateau Margaux, Chateau Lafite, Chateau Yquem, etc. In fact, Jim would have wine tastings on his porch. We lived on an avenue that was a throughway to the beach from the inner city to the Santa Monica beaches. And Jim would set up an array of glasses. And if people walked by and he knew every bum in Venice, he would stop and say, "Jingles, have a glass with us." Well, Jingles was head to toe in bells. He was a street performer. But there was a hint to him that he had some erudition, something about him. So Jim pours him a glass. I think it was a Margot. They were all vintage. And Jingles takes a sip from the glass, and he looks at Jim and he says, "Where's the fruit?" Apparently, Jingles was rejecting this glass of wine. Then came the emergence of James Paul Brown, the artist. And at that time, maybe he didn't have enough confidence in putting his work on canvas, but he painted on brown paper with graphite pencils. And then he met Julie, and the art changed, and the colors emerged. And from a graphite artist on brown paper to a masterful, masterful artist of color, you could see the transition in him from that gray to that brilliant, brilliant primary red or yellow or blue. And his work evolved as his love evolved for Julie. And I came into his life, I was 27 years old, he was 41. And he got me running with him every day. He actually had chest muscles. I was 27 and couldn't raise that chest muscle if I tried. He got me running. In fact, he talked me into running the 1979 New York Marathon. By the time I crossed the finish line, he had already finished, gotten dressed, showered, and was at the finish line to greet me. He befriended all these athletes, the entire Finnish marathon team, Lassi Viren and Asa Tikkanen, and took me running with them. And the joy he brought to me, not only in his person, but in the running, and in looking at this beautiful 41-year-old person and not fearing the future, that I'm not going to decay and go to hell in my 30s. That there was hope, that beyond 40, I could actually stand on my feet. Well, Jim introduced me to his art and fine wine, and I introduced him to poetry. And what he did with his colors, I tried to do with words. And I introduced him to a poem that became his very favorite poem. And as someone beyond mentioned, he would absolutely ask Julie on the spot to sing the flower song from Lockme. Sing the whole score of Cabaret. And she was obliging. At that point, Julie B. had aspirations. Well, the poem that I shared with him really encapsulated the love he had and the adoration he had for Julie. And if I may, one last time, this is the poem that Jim chose to recite to Julie. It's a poem by Theodore Roethke. I had nothing to do with it. I knew a woman, lovely in her bones. When small birds sighed, she'd sigh back at them. And when she moved more ways than one. All the colors a bright container can contain. Of her choice virtues, only God should speak, or English poets who grew up on Greek. I'd have them sing to her in chorus, cheek to cheek. How well her wishes went. She taught me turn and counter-turn and spin. She taught me touch. I nibbled at her proffered hand. She was the sickle and poor I the rake, coming behind her for her pretty sake. Oh, but what prodigious mowing we did make. Love likes a gander, but adores the goose. Her full lips pursed the errant note to seize. She played it light and she played it loose, and my eyes, they dazzled at her flowing parts. Her mind could keep a pure repose or one hip quiver with a mobile nose. She moved in circles, and the circles moved. Let seed be grass, and let grass turn into hay. I'm martyr to emotion, not my own. I swear she cast a shadow, white as stone. But who could measure time in days? These old bones live to learn her wanton ways. I'll measure time by how her body sways. I love you too.
Oh, I think James is right here in this room enjoying this moment. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. And now we have Gary Elliott to talk about radio days, art commissioning days. Welcome.
Thanks. Good afternoon. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that James did before he started painting. I met James 49 years ago. I know I was young then, in the spring of 1976. By then, James had helped start, with great success, the Casey Kasem Top American 40 show, if you remember that. And it was carried by virtually every rock and roll station in the country. He had been advertising director of a startup magazine and a news program called Earth. And his name appears in the masthead. He had a competent Earth News radio show that went along with the magazine. So the magazine folded, but James, being the smart guy that he was, kept the show and landed Clairol Herbal Essence, if you remember that shampoo, as its sole sponsor. James wanted to launch another show that he called Hot News. So he had this show constructed with a lovely talent, and she talked about the hottest trends in fashion, in music, movie celebrities. And they did interviews with Raquel Welch, Uri Geller, Elton John, and scores of others. His idea was simple. If you provide radio stations with entertaining news content that was wrapped around a sponsor's 30-second commercial, you had a winner. The FCC at that time was relicensing many stations, and they were especially intrigued by the fact that stations were running news. So they looked at that hungrily. Well, I was assistant media director at a large advertising agency in New York, and one of my clients was Noxzema Skin Cream, if you remember Noxzema Skin Cream. Well, James, in his upbeat and genuine, this is going to be great, pitched the idea with a promise that he could carry the radio station's programming for free. Well, this program anyway. His initial thought was he could clear 150 radio stations in the US. The fee he proposed was to cover the production costs and his operating costs. Well, Noxzema Skin Cream in those days ran radio during the summer to promote taking the sting out of sunburn. So the timing was right. James had, as I quickly learned, a Rolodex that was the who's who of marketing and advertising in the history of the profession. His circle of friends and business associates was legendary. I came to believe that James, within 2 to 3 calls, could reach anyone on earth. And we put him to the test a couple times. Well, the client was excited, and we were off and running. Every time James called with one of the stations that he was able to get, he had this upbeat, "Gary, it's Jim." And then he went on to tell me how many stations he cleared. Well, we produced the show. I still have one of the records on it because everything was produced on LP during those days. And this was the universal format the stations wanted. So we had a great time doing this. It was legendary. So with Casey Kasem, with Earth News Radio, and Hot News, Jim became the largest single radio syndicator in the United States. And he was legendary. I mean, it was just one of these things when you said that James was behind this, people would, sure, I'm on, count me in. So all this happened with his idea, a landline telephone, optimism, and his engaging personality. A promise over-delivered by a gentleman with brains. Well, I left New York for Los Angeles a couple years later, and we met up again. So Larry, right to your point, James had a bungalow right on Venice, and I went to visit him. And in his dining room, which was very dark, he had strung up clotheslines, and on the clotheslines were his paintings, dozens of them that he had lined up. And they were paintings of sailboats, of tugboats, country and city landscapes. And he said, Gary, I just started painting. I think I can paint. I love this. So from that discovery, he began his painting of orchards and sunflowers and bumblebees and dragonflies, landscapes, presidents, sports figures, famous celebrities, and so on. He beautifully and uniquely brought his imagination to life. And even as his artistry matured, it didn't stop his curiosity and entrepreneurial nature. We devoted time from over the years, beyond our day jobs, to explore things like geo-based radio messaging, selling lifelike holograms, creating customized wine for country clubs, and a number of other for-profit ideas. It was always an adventure. Jim had said to me many times, usually at the close of a conversation, Gary, look at us. Here we are, just a couple of regular guys. How did we manage to hook up with two of the most talented, beautiful women in the world? How did we get so lucky? Right he was, but James was everything but regular. Thanks.
Blooming. James Blooming. Here we are. Okay. Now, Rick Doyle to continue this conversation.
And don't worry, I'm not on the agenda. But I've known Jim for 40 years. And I'm trying to get 40 years of our time together in about 2 minutes, so please bear with me. I met Jim actually about the time that he met Julie. And I call him Julie and Jim because that's how I've always known them. So I apologize. I've talked to Julie about it. She said it's okay, so I'm good. Anyway, I met Jim in 1984 or 85, and I was working at another ad agency, and I was working on the General Motors business, and he came in to pitch a radio show for General Motors. And he was with the rep, and I don't even remember the rep's name. But we spent maybe 5 minutes talking about radio, and the rest of the hour just connecting and talking, and laughing and having a great time. And that sort of solidified our friendship from there on. One of the things that Jim mentioned on that very first day, he talked about his muse. He talked about how he met Julie and how he was smitten with her at first sight. She might have had to play the game a little bit, but Jim was bought hook, line, and sinker. He was there. Anyway, we spent, like I said, we spent a good part of an hour just sharing each other and then sharing our stories. And then over the next 10 years, every time Jim came to Detroit, we would get together for lunch or for dinner and just continue our conversations. It was a wonderful thing. Yeah, I know Jim was a great artist. I knew him as an artist, but that was not why we were friends or anything like that. We were friends because of Jim's charm and his sincerity, and we just, I mean, he was, in a lot of ways, he was a mentor to me because he was able to go into any office with anybody, as you said, and get a meeting. Now, I know his trick though, because he always would spend time getting to know the assistant or the secretary, and they're the gatekeepers, and he would charm them, and every time he would come into town, and this was mainly in New York, he would bring a signed poster for the receptionist. He often said the poem, at least part of it, and then, you know, they would love it. And then he got in to see, or we got in to see the person we wanted to talk to. And Jim's business card went from being a signed poster to a bottle of wine. And he had, and of course, the wine had his art in it, or on it, whether it was originally that or he put it on himself. Eventually I asked, because I get these bottles, and it was just his art and nothing else. And I asked him, Jim, how do you do this? And he told me the secret. Anyway, we had a wonderful time together, and after about, well, the last 20 years, the radio business sort of dried up for us because of all the mergers and everything, and the cookie cutter formats. So I was living in New York, and Jim would come in, but eventually I left New York, and we parted ways for that part of our life together. But we stayed in contact. We probably talked every week. We tried 3 or 4 different business ventures. None of them were a home run. None of them ever made it to first base. But I think the reason, as much as anything, was it gave us an excuse to get together and spend a week in New York, or a week in Fort Lauderdale, or even a week in Indianapolis, and share time together. You know, Jim was definitely a treasure that we all shared, and he is definitely missed. Thank you.